Let's cut right to the chase. Creative people are pretty nuts, and I know this because I'm one of them. If you're like me, you wonder, how do people get over the issues we face? That's what this show is all about. Think of each episode as a warm bath for the soul. We're all in this together, so let's do something good with the time we have left. This show is my love letter to the human condition. This, my friends, is Sentimental Illness.
I've got a guest today that I want to get to pretty quick, but I do want to say a few things. I turned 58 the other day, Monday, actually, so day before yesterday, which is very strange because inside, I get it. Look, I get it. I do not look 19. Inside, I feel 19. I still feel young and viable and capable. I've still got my chops. I can still sing. I still like cute, later teenage girls. That sounds creepy. I still feel like the world has hope. But I'm 58 and, I know that things have passed me by and, I'm a dinosaur to most of you. And, I am not going to apologize for that, but it's a very strange thing being 58 because I remember when my dad was 38 and I remember thinking how old that was. And I'm 20 years older than that. And it's a very strange thing. Went to my 40th high school reunion recently. And that was, a challenge and fun and weird and, disheartening and overwhelming because half of my friends are like bazillionaires who have like a third home in Hawaii, you know what I mean? And then there's me living in a little apartment in the middle of nowhere. I'm not pathetic. I swear to God, I'm not pathetic. I just realized that 58's a nice place to be. But it is weird when you look back and you say, how did I get here? And you think about the fact that, yeah, the last 40 years does feel like it has gone by quickly. And yet, if I really analyze it, it absolutely feels like 40 years. I have done a ton of stuff. I've seen the world. I've traveled around the world as a musician, as a worker and, in regular jobs as well, because being a musician is not a regular job. I've fished in Alaska and worked in restaurants and done all sorts of weird things, but, God dang, 58. It's very strange. Who knew we'd be here? How we'd get here? I was supposed to be a contender. All right. I know my guess is like, dude, just shut up. Just shut up. I'm actually kind of nervous, kind of excited. Actually, really, really excited. This guy is amazing. Okay, so you guys all know I'm a drummer. And everybody says that. What happens is you have that friend that says, hey, you should see my friend's band. It's great. They're playing at the local pub. And you go and they suck, and that sounds really awful, but it tends to be true. So when people say things like, oh, I'm a guitarist or I'm a drummer, it's easy to poo-poo it because most people don't realize the time and effort put in to become something extraordinary. And Blake is extraordinary. My guest today is Blake Fleming. And, he's played with a lot of amazing musicians over the years, and he's evolved into an author, obviously a solo artist. He's done so much, started Dazzling Killmen years back, part of Mars Volta for a while, worked with Sean Lennon. Who else? The Ropes, Kim Taylor, the Lemonheads. Yeah. So dude's been around. And, of course, I'm guessing at some of this because, you take information you can get from your research. The stuff I do know, Dazzling Killmen, definitely, and Mars Volta. But the other stuff, you get off of Wikipedia and you kind of hope it's right. So I hope it's right. Actually, I've never heard the stuff he did with the Lemonheads, so I'm not really sure if it's real, but that's what it says. So we'll get there. Anyways, he's lived a life, and it's good. And he's proof that, if you stick to your guns, you can really do something with this business. And I admire that. I honor that so much because it is so hard to be a musician, let alone a professional musician, to be one that, survives every up and down, and there's so many downs in the business. It's very, very challenging to be here. But I am fortunate to have Blake with me today. And to quote Blade Runner, I'm sure he's seen things off the shoulder of Orion, ships on fire. And I can't wait to hear his stories. So Blake's here to talk about his book and his new solo works, and we're going to get there. So let's bring him on, and let me embarrass myself. And here we go, adding him to the stage. Blake Fleming, welcome, my friend. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, you're catching me on a decent day.
I hope I didn't blow too much smoke up your tailpipe. I know that it gets a little weird, and when you're a spaz like me, you tend to kind of overdo it. But the kudos are highly earned, man. I think you're a pretty amazing talent.
I appreciate that. I mean, like you said, it's difficult to do this in the first place. So when you get people that express their appreciation, I don't hesitate to take that.
Yeah. I mean, I would say this, and I admit to a tremendous amount of envy. You know, all I ever wanted in 1974 was to grow up to be a famous musician. And, for whatever reason, my choices, whether it was the bands I was with or just the time periods, I never quite hit that moment. I never quite hit that space. And so it's always fantastic to see somebody who just drives right through it and really becomes a somebody in the industry. And it's such an honor to have you here, man. I really want you to know that before I stop talking and stop fawning about you, and we just get right to the meat of it. So thanks for being here.
I mean, I don't feel that I'm anyone in the industry. I think it's all kind of relative,
Sure.
in a way, but I really appreciate that. I have kind of let people's viewpoints of me, which is usually sometimes more exaggerated than what the reality of me is.
Right.
I just kind of let that shape the public opinion after a while, and I stopped fighting against it. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
that people think that I've done. I mean, I've definitely been trying, but it's interesting how people perceive other people.
Yeah. The celebrity thing is a strange thing, the piece of it. And I'm not saying that you feel like a celebrity, but what happens is people hear a name aligned with someone, and the next thing they know, they're like, oh my God, well, I heard about that, right? Like excuse me, I'm gonna cough again. I'm gonna mute myself. Hang on. Okay, there we go. Mike Reno, from Loverboy, I've had on the show a couple of times, and he's very, very down to earth, very kind, very sweet natured, just really, really nice to me. Never felt arrogant, anything about him, no smoke out there. And what I like about that is he belies the idea of celebrity, because for me, when I was 14 and his band was breaking, that was everything to me. That the idea of the rock star, the desire to be one of those things. And then when you finally start meeting these people and you realize that, oh yeah, this is a thing we've been taught to think about them that isn't true, that they're just normal people doing a thing. And, back in 95, I had a brief encounter with Eddie Vedder. I'm not friends with him at all, but I was talking to him one day at a record store, and I asked him a really simple question, and he said, excuse me, I said, hey Ed, what's it like? You know what I mean? Just the most basic answer. And he said, Rob, the only difference between you and me is I do what I do on television, and people think that means something, and it doesn't. And I was like, that's rad.
Yeah, I mean, you can do a lot with the malleability of people's perception, and especially nowadays where it's like, so many people are not even seeing you in person. It's just like, imagery that's online much of the time. And so, I mean, with all of these Instagram stars and TikTok stars, I mean, we can see that anybody can become famous in a way. It has nothing really to do with substance or talent. Sometimes it does, but other times it's just you understand how to manipulate the technology. You've grown up with it, and it's funny. I was hanging out I wasn't hanging out. I hung out one night with Eddie Vedder in 95 or
Yeah.
no, it was early 96. I was on tour with the Japanese band Zenigeva. They had lost their drummer in Japan. And I knew those guys. We were friends from the Killmen days. And so I did a US tour with them. And we were playing in Seattle, and Eddie's then wife, Beth, I believe her name was,
I
had
think
a
that was
band
her name.
called, maybe they were called Space Needle?
Hovercraft.
Hovercraft. Thank you. Oh, that's it. Not Space Needle, which was another cool band. Hovercraft.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I think we either opened for them or they opened for us. I don't remember. Not that matters, but we hung out with Eddie at the merch table for a couple hours after that show, and I remember we were eating like cheese sandwiches and drinking some beer, and he gave us some money out of his pocket.
Yeah, very nice man.
We got shorted on our guarantee from the club, and it was a pretty decent show. I mean, yeah, it was a pretty decent show, but this would have been March or April of 1996, and I mean, he was one of the most famous people in the world at that point.
Yeah,
he's kind of diminutive in size, and but definitely has an aura, and was just like super nice and down to earth. So that's my sort of Eddie Vedder story from around that same period, actually.
Yeah, the no code era, right? The early 96. I remember that era well, but I didn't know you were in that band, or I should say I didn't know you covered in that band. So you basically were the touring drummer for that whole tour back in 96.
Yeah, I think it was I can't remember. It was the album that came after Freedom Bondage. It was that tour. I can't remember the name of it now at the moment, but it was that early 96. I did the tour. It was 2 months around the U.S. It was another record they had done for Alternative Tentacles. So I got to meet Jello one night and stuff in San Francisco, and like hung out with him, and like he drove around in his VW. I remember he came up to introduce himself on the stage. I was packing up my stuff after we got done playing this place called the Kilowatt in San Francisco, and he comes up. He's got a purple turtleneck on that's tucked in to these like dark, like kind of mom jeans with a belt on. Right. And there's no shirt over the turtleneck. It's just a turtleneck, which is quite a statement. And it said the Carpenters on it. And he comes up and he goes, Boucher is the name, because his real name is Eric Boucher. And I, of course, knew who he was. And I was like, Jello. Oh, my God. Like, I was kind of stumbling over my words. I don't know how old I was at that time, 19, 20, 21. I can't remember, something like that. But yeah, he was quite a character. But yeah, we did 2 months around the U.S. And then I came back to the Midwest and then moved out to New York City in the summer of 96.
Wow. So do you speak Japanese?
No, not at all. Arigato.
Okay.
No, very, very, very little, very little.
No,
that's I love so cool, Japanese people. I love Japanese culture. I've had a lot of Japanese students, and there's something about the Japanese are so kind and gentle and respectful of tradition, but also completely insane at the same time. Like the artistically, like what they can output sometimes, from the boredoms to like the crazy artwork that like John Zorn would use in certain things. And, it's, I really like that combination, because it's really very gentle and cute, and then also super fierce at the same time, which I appreciate that.
Yeah. You're right on the money. My wife is Japanese, and so I go a lot. And my first time was in 98, but I remember talking to somebody on my first trip, and two things happened to me that were amazing, that were indelible. One, when I got off the plane in Osaka, I remember smelling the air, and it smelled, like a, I don't know, Japanese grocery store. It had a very distinct smell, and this was at the airport. And I remember thinking, like, I don't know what it is, but I feel like I'm an adopted kid who's just meeting his birth family. It just instantly connected with me. It felt really real. And while I was there, I met a college student who had come up with this phrase about Japan. He said, the best way to explain Japan to anybody outside the country is it's the dichotomy. It's two things. It's the land of Zen, and it's also the land of sugar-free cotton candy. Like it doesn't make any sense how those two things work together, but they do. And it goes very similar down the vein of what you were just saying, which is this place of extreme cleanliness and timeliness and honor and history and quiet. And then there's this madcap, zany, over the top, highly expressive, maniacal part of their culture that you think is hidden, but it's actually just bubbling below the surface. And it's fantastic.
Yeah. As you're saying that, part of me is making me think too, that, one of the things about the extremism in the art has got to be the fact that they got the fucking shit bombed out of them, man.
That's where it comes from.
Decimation is going to have a profound effect.
Yes.
Right? And I think that is also reflected in that. And I just, I've always loved how they can really operate at both extremes, because I kind of feel I can relate to that. I like the gray area, and that's where I try to reside a little bit more. It's better for my sanity if I do, but I can really appreciate, the polarity, of some of that stuff there. I've never been, unfortunately, but hopefully one of these days. And I believe that I have a collaboration. We haven't talked about it much, but we just talked about it very, very briefly about collaborating with KK Null again from the band Zinageva. I might kind of start working on like a little bit of a duo project. We'll see. We've tossed around the idea, so I have to get in touch with him actually.
That's fantastic. Well, history provides opportunity, and here you are, 25, 30 years later, you're still connected to these people, and that's amazing, man. It's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the benefits of the internet and social media, as much as I can harp on social media and as much as I don't like aspects of it, it is good for some things, and that's one of them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's get to this.
And now it's time for self-diagnosis.
All right, Blake. So from everything the internet tells me, you grew up on the eastern shores of the Mississippi River in a little town called Alton. Now, I don't know if you grew up there, but according to the wiki, you were born there. What was
I grew up there as well.
Okay. So what was life like in that small town? How did it feel to be a creative kid in that environment?
It's a small river town, blue collar.
Yeah.
One criticism of that area in general is there was a lot of racism.
Huh.
I grew up like 20 minutes from Ferguson, Missouri, which was like burning down just a number of years ago,
Right.
And there's always been a little bit of divide now as generations have aged out. We're seeing less of that, but like say growing up outside of St. Louis is like very segregated in some ways. There were neighborhoods that were like, oh, this is like a black neighborhood, quote unquote,
Right.
There are gangs here, quote unquote, all that kind of stuff. This is a white neighborhood. It was a lot of lines of division. So that I kind of noticed and felt pretty early on. And then also the amount of religion in the area and the amount of churches and stuff. Like I went to church as a kid until my parents allowed me to make my own decision whether I wanted to go anymore. And I decided I just didn't, it just didn't speak to me. Right. And I really didn't believe in it, even from a young age, like the whole stories I was being told and all the guilt and, and going to hell and all that stuff. It just didn't make any sense to me. So getting that out of the way, Alton was a great place to grow up. Like I had loving parents who were, really supportive and gave me like a good amount of freedom. There's quite a bit of art and culture in that area. There's a lot of history. There were a lot of bands getting started as I was kind of getting started as well. And there always has been kind of a history of musicians coming through there. I mean, Miles Davis was born there, but I mean, actual, like, like independent musicians, like, from the 90s, because there was a lot of industry that 50s and 60s and 70s may have thrived, and then those places just got gutted and emptied out. So there was a lot of empty buildings when I was growing up, which I loved playing in, like, kind of, urban decay a little bit.
Yeah.
I dug that. And so it was really cheap to get a loft space. Like every band that I knew, like everybody had their own practice spaces. We didn't share spaces. We all had our own, and they were like $100 a month, and they were fucking huge.
Yeah.
And I mean, like Dazzling Killmen, we had a loft on the 3rd story of this building. It was above a flower shop, and after 5 p.m. when the flower shop closed, we could open all the windows and just crank out into downtown Alton. People would be like, "What in the fuck is going on up there?" It was definitely nothing sounding like what we were doing at that point in time, especially in Alton. There was a lot of cover bands, and then there was a lot of great bands, like Judge Nothing was one of them. Was coming up around then, and a band called the Bishops, and Autumn Clock. There was a pretty thriving scene there. So in that way, it was great. And the fact that you were close to St. Louis was great. You had access to concerts and record stores and cultural events and that sort of thing. But you could also very easily, like, just head out down the Mississippi Road, the Mississippi River Road, and go hiking in the bluffs, or Alton, like the street that I lived on in Alton was the last street before it became rural, so I could go one way. I'm like, okay, I'm in town, and go the other way, I'm in the country. And I always loved it. Like I felt that I grew up in a pretty good place, considering, I mean, fuck, man, I could have grown up in, Gaza or somewhere,
Sure. Absolutely. Very safe, relatively. Yeah,
absolutely. And like I said, there's, the things with like religion and racism and stuff. I mean, all that's, it's nothing new. It's been going on there. It's just one of those places where you can see it a little bit more in Illinois and in Missouri,
Yeah. I get
like
that.
I said, there was like real segregation in both those places when I was growing up. There was real lines of, as far as neighborhoods went, and that's changing, luckily.
Yeah. It's interesting what you're bringing up too. It's something I've been thinking about the past couple of days. The last thing I'll really want to do is turn this into a big political debate on this show.
No.
People gloss over, right? But the one thing that I do want to say that has to do with what you're talking about, which is this idea that we're afraid, of course, of what we don't understand. But we've been taught over the years, and I'm not talking about your comments on religion. That's not what I mean. But what we've been taught over the years is to be afraid. We're very xenophobic in this country. We're taught to be afraid of outsiders. And I really don't understand that. This idea that people are pouring over the border to murder and rape you is really, really strange concept. They're not coming to do anything but live. That's, I mean, and sure, there's anomalies. Of course, there's the one guy that's taking advantage of it to bring drugs across the border or to rape and kill. But that's not the norm. That's not the average. That's not the family. That's not anything else. And I can't stand that we're locked in this thinking, this fear-based thinking. And I don't want to say it's just one side, but it is mostly one side that argues it, and it drives me nuts.
I think we have to start thinking for ourselves outside of these controlled narratives from both sides.
Yes.
And start just going, man, these are people. I'm a person. I wonder what that must be like, like have a little empathy, and have a little common sense. And I think that could really go a long way. But unfortunately, we are addicted to the more saccharine, the more sugary, little tidbits, the things that we just like, all the news and things that want to, boost the dopamine or get us angry, have our 2 minutes hate, or the moments of dopamine, and then swirl that all and then be manipulated by that, is like, that's what's happening. That's why it's like all that stuff, like hate and thinking about, the people coming across the border are this, like, it's all taught now, I mean, again, I don't want to get into it. I really don't want to talk politics and stuff here, but, we just need a little common sense and a little balance in general. But we kind of like the boat goes, whoa, and here we are, and now we're going here, and then we're like on the left, and then we're on the right, and it's like, so much of that is fabricated in the media. Because when I go out and I'm around people, because I try to be very open and take people for who they are as people, and not because back in the 70s and 80s and when I was growing up and shit, like, yeah, so and so, well, Bill's a Republican, but Bernice is a Democrat, but no one gave a shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
No one really cared. It wasn't something that like put us at each other's throats. Like we've been manipulated,
Yes.
And I want to get back to the judging my neighbor by my interactions with people in the actual real world, and not just the whole sort of circus that I'm seeing, because everybody online is playing some sort of role or wearing some sort of a mask or something. I mean, it's very easy to mask yourselves in these ways. And I think more people are smarter than we give them credit for as well. At least I'm hoping,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I find it strange too that, like the other day, I tend not to get in arguments on social media because of course they're meaningless.
Yeah.
But this random person, wanted to throw me under the bus a bit about, some comment I made about, some faith forum on Twitter. And, long story short, they started sending me private messages of all this junk that they thought I thought. And I thought, why would you think that? I mean, I never said anything of the sort. And their response was, because you follow Jordan Peterson. I said, you can follow somebody because you love them, admire them, despise them. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to follow somebody. It doesn't make an endorsement. It means you're curious about their position. Maybe you want to use it to benefit or, bolster your own argument, but you might want it to push against, arguments of others. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just find it so strange that there's this idea that if we align ourselves with somebody through social media, that must mean we agree with everything they say. And why can't we get back to what you said in the beginning, which is, I grew up with a grandparent that pounded a table because Reagan thought a certain way. but that doesn't mean I couldn't love that family member, and we didn't leave thinking like, oh, you stupid idiot. You think Reagan's fantastic. And I think he's a piece of shit. It was just a discussion, and then it was left. It was done. It was over. We could go on and be related and still love each other.
We've been corralled into this division with each other because it makes things much easier to manipulate when we're all constantly fighting over shit with each other. We take our eyes off the real things that actually matter. And a lot of things get done surreptitiously because we're too busy like looking at the fucking Kardashians or something stupid in that sort of way,
Yeah, so true. Well, look, I want to go back to Alton, Illinois for a minute. Do you feel like you stood out? Were you one of those kids that they just knew there was something a little bit different about you, or maybe even a little bit off about you?
I don't know.
Because
my childhood story for some is kind of boring in the fact that like I was pretty happy and I had good parents that like loved me and loved each other. And like, I didn't grow up all fucked up and depressed, spending all this time by myself in my room. And that's why I'm the artist that I am. I've gotten way, way more fucked up as I've gotten older.
Same here.
And way more like I am the guy in the room by myself. I mean, look at my fucking solo records, right? I mean, like that's me, it's been in reverse now, but what was your question again?
No, I was just saying the idea of standing out as a young person, being the quirky artist kid that has, an entire loft above a store. You know what I mean? Like, there's the weird kid.
I was pretty well liked as a by my peer group in general. I had two older brothers that like I learned a lot from, and then like I I got into these musical organizations as a young kid that had older teenagers in them. And I learned a lot. I was kind of, I don't know, like, I was a kid that was 8 or 9 and that knew about the Clash, and knew about the Ramones. And like, by the time I was 14, like I had seen the Ramones, and
Right.
in a pretty small club, relatively speaking, in St. Louis, I could have untied Joey Ramone's shoestrings, like from where I was, which was right up next to the stage.
Right.
But I think I stood out a little bit because I had signs of talent at a pretty young age. So, by the time I was, say, between the ages of 10 and 12, I could play on the level of people that were maybe 16 or something, or
Right. You were
17.
advanced. Yeah.
I was advanced for my age. And so I did stand out a little bit that way. And then, I was always a bit of the class clown. Like it would be on my report cards, and I definitely especially, it's typical cliche. You're in the drum line, you're in the drum section, you're like in the symphony orchestra. There's a bunch of there's a million measures of rests.
Yes.
You're doing like some pretty gnarly shit back there to pass the time. I can't even say some of the stuff nowadays that we fucking did. I mean, literally, we'd be like, oh, well, blah, 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 blah. It's like, man, we were just kids, man. But I do remember one time that the band director pointing at me for this like big timpani sort of solo section. And we were rehearsing in the auditorium because we had the concert like the next day. And I was up in the fucking rafters of the auditorium. Literally, I had found the ladder and I was just like up there, like, above the band, like some episode of some scene in Carrie or something, and he literally, like, you could see like little bits of lint and dust kind of falling, like, from the stage lights. And he looks up and I miss my cue. And instead of being on the timpani, I'm up in the rafters, and he lost it, man. He threw his podium, like he threw the score, and then he threw the music stand off his podium into the empty auditorium for a rehearsal. Rehearsal was done that day. That was it. And he went back to his office and like, yeah. So, I had a reputation in those sort of ways. I just, I don't know, man. I don't know. Yeah. I never really felt like I stood out that much, but maybe in hindsight, I did to some degree, partially because I was a little more advanced, in my talent there with drumming. And then I was pretty extroverted, too. Right. I like to cut up and have fun and make people laugh and that kind of thing. So,
yeah.
But I wasn't like the weird, like, oh, hey, I wasn't like the Morrissey kid. Like I would be. I mean, like, the guys in Dazzling Killmen would come pick me up for a gig and I'd literally be like asleep in the dark basement with like listening to the Smiths and shit. They used to make fun of me about stuff like that, but I wasn't the dark brooding type then. I became much more that as I got older, to be quite honest.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, it's interesting you bring this up, the idea of sitting there counting rests. I remember that well. I remember looking at a piece of sheet music, symphonic music, a concert band, right?
Yeah,
and it would be a performance of, say, Wagner or something. And there would be like 114 measures of rest. And you'd literally be standing there with your friends counting each bar.
Yeah.
And then after a while, you memorized it to the point that you could look at the conductor and be like, okay, here we go. I know we're coming up on it now. And it would be a flam and a 5-stroke roll, and then and maybe a cymbal crash, and then you'd be out for another 20 bars until the end of the piece when the fermata came up.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. A lot of time for misbehaving.
Yeah. Lots of farts going on back in the drum line. Lots of farts, lots of practical jokes, lots of actually really mean-spirited stuff, at least at my school. There was a lot of kids picking on kids. In fact, I actually even dropped out of band in my sophomore year because I got bullied so much in the drum line. And then I remember sitting in the library for a study hall, and the music teacher came in and said, "Rob, what are you doing?" And I was like, "You belong in there. It doesn't matter what the kids are doing. Put them in their place." So we did a pep band, and you played horse in pep band, right? Didn't everybody play horse in our generation? I mean, I think you're a year younger than me, but
I,
horse.
I remember the basketball game.
And it was a,
I
it
don't
was a
know.
da 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 da.
I
It
didn't
was a
play in the pep band.
oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it was a Maynard Ferguson song, I believe.
Okay. We used to do
But
Birdland and
yeah, yeah,
those
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
things.
yeah. But I remember the teacher having me sit down and play horse during pep band because it had an 8-bar drum solo in it, and he wanted me to put the other kids in their place. So he's like, Rob, just go for it. I'll count you through the whole thing. You want to play weird polyrhythms? Go for it, man. You know what I mean? We'll get you through the 8 bars. And that was a great teacher. He taught me one of the best things I've ever heard is like, if you're gonna make a mistake, make it big, make it loud. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which of course is translated into life. I mean, that's why I do this. I suck at this. But I genuinely like meeting amazing people like yourself. So I do it because I find pleasure in meeting amazing musicians from all over the world and befriending them. That's pretty freaking rad, man.
Right on. Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand that.
And trying not to talk about myself too much. So let me ask you this. You're in this small town. Do you feel like you were born for this? I mean, like, is this the only thing you've ever seen in your life? The only thing you ever envisioned was being a creative person, being a drummer, being a writer, being a person who had a voice that they wanted to share with the world?
Yeah, pretty much, because that's all I ever really have done. I mean, I started playing the drums when I was 8.
Right.
My first real band, Dazzling Killmen, when Darren and I met, the bass player, and kind of started the first step in that, I was 15. By the time the band started, I was maybe 16,
Crazy,
17, something like that. And then that's all I've done. I mean, I had to have little jobs, here and there. Like, I mean, I've bartended and I've worked retail and I've, waited tables and all that kind of stuff. And, but then I always have taught privately through that as well. And that kind of, buffered me from having to do a lot of things that I didn't want to do, because
right.
Yeah. But yeah, overall, I mean, the other thing that could see myself becoming would be like a therapist, like a psychologist of some sort. Because I've just always gotten into talking with people about real things that go on with them and things involving the human condition, things that we all go through, things that people hide a lot that we all go through. Like, I just never been one to feel the need to hide a lot of things like that. Like, I'm very unedited. Like, I don't have anything to hide, really. I mean, I really don't, and that's purposeful. So I can kind of live without, carrying any of that sort of baggage around with me. Yeah.
No, that's super cool. So then you're a perfect candidate to be here, because one of the things that I'm focused on is the idea of being completely 100% transparent, being available to everybody at all times. And it's interesting because the idea of being clear about who you are and where you're at in life is a struggle that most people, well, they hold that very close to the vest, right? So most people aren't willing to necessarily talk about every aspect of their life in public. It's not necessarily anybody's business, but they're not necessarily comfortable with sharing a thought because it exposes them in some way. And I'm of the belief that you just speak the truth all the time. And it's not to say, where the chips fall, they fall, and too bad, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. But it's this idea of just saying, if you're 100% pure in the sense of saying exactly who you are, exactly what you think at all times, not to harm, but to just be clear, the world knows exactly what you're about. And you can actually make headway that way. You can actually get a point of view across because people say, oh, here's a guy who's 100% transparent. He's sharing exactly what he thinks. He really believes this. You have nothing to hide. And I think that's an incredible thing.
Yeah, I mean, because it gives more people the courage to step out of their shells and
Yes.
to be themselves.
Yeah.
man, I mean, I had a whole, I mean, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I mean, like, I had a crazy trip, December 30th, 1994. And I like ran into a bar with about 300 people in it. It was the day before New Year's Eve, and I was completely naked except for a 4-foot rain stick and a fucking pair of socks, dude. Okay. And the reason that I did that was I was tripping my balls off, first of all. And I was having like this sort of like Messiah moment, which is pretty typical and cliche. But I wanted to go in there and be literally naked to show people, hey, let's all take our masks off and be ourselves. I mean, that, that got me into some trouble. Like pushing that, I've since then learned to control the substances that I ingest if I do so. But back then the message was more powerful than I could control. And so was the dose that I took. And that's what it was, man. It was just it was to save people. Quote unquote. It was to help people. It was like to show them like, hey man, like we're all in this together. And like, my shit stinks too, man, and you know what?
Yeah.
Yep. I'm scared too. And I cry too. And it was to show all of that, to show our humanity. Right. And so I've just kind of always been that way. Like for my parents, sometimes they were a little bit like, hey, dude, like TMI, like,
right. Bring it down a little.
I'm just, but they always knew where I was at or what I was about in general, because I just told them, I just I didn't feel the need to hide a lot of stuff, in that way, because I just felt like everybody else, I'm not going to it's bullshit, because everybody else is going through the same stuff too. Everybody else is just trying to, not everybody, but many of us are just trying to, hey, just get through the day. Right. And sometimes you got to do that.
Yeah.
I just kind of wear it on my sleeve more. And I always have. That was something that my parents was like, you gotta quit wearing your heart on your sleeve. And I'm like, I don't know where else to put it. Just, this is there. I don't know. I mean, I guess I was born with it there, metaphorically.
Right.
So.
Right. You can't tell me to stop being me. I am me. This is how I'm programmed. This is the way I think. These are my behaviors. I'm not putting them on. Right.
Absolutely not. No, it's would be too much work otherwise.
Are your parents still alive?
My dad is. My mom passed away. God, it's been 8 years now, which is insane.
Wow.
Just this past month. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. She was a long time smoker of cigarettes, and really liked Diet Coke and like sweets and things that traditionally are not so great for us. So she passed away, but my dad is 86, smokes like a chimney, still kicking, clean bill of health, lives in the house I grew up in, like independent still basically, and kicking ass.
Awesome.
So I will take those genes for 500.
Yeah. Well, you might very well have them. I mean, you obviously have a part of them.
Yeah.
And I've never understood why some people are able to escape the physical maladies that, befall others, doing the same thing, the smoking, the drinking, the drugging. But it is amazing how there's always a few guys who find their way through. So your dad's basically his own generation's version of George? What was the guys who did Oh God?
George Burns.
George Burns, George and Gracie. Yeah. That guy lived forever. He smoked like a chimney, man. He was like 100.
Yeah.
Oh, I cannot stop coughing. I'm so sorry. So being that you're a person of clarity and substance, and you feel like you have a voice that needs to be shared, and I'm not saying in the sense of preaching to others, but just being 100% transparent all the time. Tell me about the book. Tell me why you chose to become an author all these years ago, and why are you writing these books now? Why are you writing these stories today? Like, what's the point of it?
Well, I mean, the one book that I've written so far is called The Book of Rhythm, and it's not like a narrative sort of thing. I mean, there's an introduction, but it's literally the largest collection of rhythm ever put together so far. And it's all in mathematical order as far as how everything progresses, how the rhythms progress and how the rests progress within those rhythms. I developed my own sort of algorithm, I guess you could say. I did it all by hand. I wrote it out by hand over the course of 2 marble notebooks back in, let's see, I started like November 2017, and I had the book in hand by January or February 2019.
Wow.
So it was about 15 months of solid work until I had, from the idea until I had like, oh, here's the finished product, and now I'm selling it. So, it's the largest collection of rhythm ever written, like I said. The first 238 rhythms of it, which deals with 3-note groupings, 4-note groupings, 5-note, 6-note, and 7-note groupings. Those are all written in a those are written in a binary form, a rest or a note. You either play or you don't.
Right.
So that, because I wanted to give pretty immediate access to a lot of people, young people, beginners, first timers, to rhythms, not just in 2 or 4.
Right.
So anybody who can count to 7 can play in 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, utilizing the rhythms in my book, because it's written in a binary form. And then I introduce, a quarter note and a quarter, and then a dotted quarter note is the other 2 elements of the book. The book is made up of 1/8 notes, quarter notes, and dotted quarter notes. And there are over 5,000 rhythms, just basic rhythms in the book. But the thing is it's how you interpret those rhythms and ideas that makes it so powerful.
Yeah.
Meaning that there are so many ways to manipulate and to layer the rhythms and to utilize the rests in the measures as information as well. Like for a drummer, just very simply, you might say, oh, all the notes are in my right hand, but all the rests are in my left hand. And all of a sudden you've got these sticking patterns that are very usable because you're not approaching them from thinking about them as sticking patterns. You're thinking about them as rhythms. If I can get you to think about the sticking as a rhythm, you can utilize that sticking immediately on the kit. If I have you think about the same sticking, but as just a sticking pattern, you start to move it around the kit, you're going to mess it up very quickly and it will be frustrating. So a big part of it is unlocking people's creativity, because it depends on which direction they approach kind of entering the door. Some people keep on walking into the wall that's right next to the door and then change your mode of thinking just a little bit, and all of a sudden the door has immediate access to you.
Right.
A weird way of putting it, but and so the book it's not only like a gigantic rhythm collection, literally the biggest ever created. I mean, I did so much research. I had a lawyer, I had many friends, like drummers and non-drummers, and just people researching the crap out of this to make sure, so when I say things like this, I can really speak confidently that, I literally made an archive that had never been done before. And like, I think I'm more impressed by that than most people are.
Right. That's badass.
And you know what? Fuck it. I mean, I really, it's amazing. Like, but like, that no one did that I was the first to do it is like, that's pretty damn cool. That's pretty damn cool. And then what you can do with it, like, because for me, it was like, okay, I want to create one music book, an instructional book that's like my Deserted Island book. Right. And there wasn't one out there. So I wrote it, and that's kind of the story of it in a nutshell. But it is like,
sounds like a modern stick control.
It is that, but it's a lot more than that, because you can interpret the rhythms via stick control. Like you take a note and make it a flam, or take a note and make it a double stroke, or make it the buzz, or all the rest or are the doubles or the singles, or make all the notes are accents while the rest are unaccented notes, or I'm going to play all the comping notes in the snare and fill in like on the bass drum, which is getting into some of the Alan Dawson sort of methods that he taught using the book's Syncopation with famous students like Tony Williams,
Right.
Any of those sort of concepts can be used in the book too. So you can take the book at face value and there's almost a lifetime of work in there. But then when you actually start to see like, oh, okay, I can do this with it and I can do this. And you start to go, oh, what if I did this? What if we inverted that? What if we reversed that? What if I filled this? What if I took this away? What if I added that? You start asking these what if questions. And all of a sudden it's like, people are starting to think outside of their own kind of comfort zones and they have this massive resource to do it in.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. It's funny. I grew up as a drummer, I grew up, just playing by ear, right? Playing with records. That was my thing. And it wasn't until I was 19 that I sat down with an instructor and actually learned what the rhythms look like in the sense of, sure, I mean, I knew the basics. I remember looking through manuscripts in my high school and certainly being able to read the notes. I knew what quarter notes and 16th notes and all that stuff was. But as far as sight reading, that was always really challenging for me. And it sounds to me like what you've taken is you've broken this down, like created all these rhythms, creating these opportunities, different ways to see note patterns, different way to see groupings and apply them to your own take on drumming, whether it's symphonic drumming or kit drumming. And I love that. I don't know if you've ever heard of, that book. I can't remember what you called. You just mentioned a second ago, the Syncopation book. It's the purple one. I just remember it's purple.
The one book is called Syncopation. Ted Reed's Syncopation.
Right. I guess that's it.
Yeah.
And when I joined the Navy back in 1987, I broke up with my girlfriend. And in a fit of rage, joined the military. One of the weirdest, dumbest choices I ever made. Ultimately ended up. It actually ended up really good for me. A couple years later, I joined to be on submarines. I have no idea why. I wanted to try something different. And after 2 years on submarines, I cross-rated into the Navy band. So I had to audition, had to do all this other stuff. And then, I played music for the rest of my Navy career until I got out in 94. So 7.5 years of being a musician in the Navy. And one of the things they had me do that I had never done, which is sit down with that Syncopation book and play swing patterns on the ride and then just do note replacement. So the idea of everything that was a half note or longer was on the bass drum, and everything that was a half note or shorter, or excuse me, whatever you want to call it, a quarter note or shorter, was on the snare or on the toms. And I had never applied such an obvious technique to, reading and developing that craft, but it completely changed the game for me. And it helped me see and hear, most importantly, here's a way for the drums here's a way for you to think outside of that, 2/4 box, basically, was what it was. Because I'd always relied on somebody else's songwriting, right? You take something by Rush, for example, that was in 7. A lot of the material was in 7. And so you would learn how to play in 7 by copying what Neil Peart was playing. Mm-hmm. And that was my deepest take on odd rhythm. It wasn't until I really got into, analyzing Terry Bozzio's work with Zappa or Vinnie Colaiuta and realizing that there were depths I hadn't even plumbed. And so I like the idea of this book completely changing the game for any drummer, whether they're young and aspiring or older and set in their ways. And that's pretty fantastic. I didn't know that was what the book was about, Blake. I'm not going to lie, because I haven't seen the manuscript. So my assumption was it was more about, it was a treatise. It was a book on your life and a book on your life within the rhythmic space, more like a metaphor for who you are than it was an actual book on drumming, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that might be another book that I write something, a little more of an autobiographical journey, but through, via rhythm and drumming. But one thing I want to say about the book too is it's not a drumming book. It's a rhythm book. It's for every instrument. Like any instrumentalist can utilize this book. And I have, it's been sold it's over 20 countries, 21, 22 countries now, including Russia. Just right before the war broke out. And it's in its second printing. And I've had musicians of every ilk buy the book. I've worked with piano players and trumpeters and bass players, guitar players, of course, drummers. I've worked with a lot of other instrumentalists utilizing the book too, because like I said, it's a rhythm resource, and what you do with those rhythms and what you play them on is up to you. And it's the idea that a lot of people I have found, because I've been teaching music since I was 14, 15 years old.
Wow.
Is that they don't realize the options that they have sometimes as a musician. Like, oh, you mean I can do that with it? Oh, you mean we could move it here? You mean we could, oh, you mean, I get that all the time as a teacher from students that just not realizing that, oh, we have these options here. And so one thing about my book is that let's say from an intermediate to advanced player, but just even very intermediate, the idea that, like, the way that you were interpreting the Syncopation book is so important, that is coming from Alan Dawson, it is because a big part of the information is in your mind. You have to visualize it. It's not all written out on the page. Yeah. So now we're taking this rhythm, say from Syncopation, you're going to use that as the copying material, but you've got other rhythms going on in your limbs that's not written out, and how that rhythm juxtaposes against the jazz rideable pattern is not written out. We have to conjure that mentally. And so you have to be to a certain level in order to be able to do that. But that's something that I immediately start having my students do when they can. It's like, okay, whether it be, if it's like a 1-bar groove and now they can play it, okay, I'm taking the book away. Now play it for me.
Nice.
Because you've got to be able to hear it. You've got to be able to hear it. Because once you can hear it, you've got it. You can play it. Because if the ear is confused or lost, so is the body. Musically speaking.
Wow, that's a quote. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's. I'm sorry. I'm just fighting so hard not to cough. Sorry. Gosh, man.
No, you're good, man.
Okay. Yeah. For anybody watching this, you can just see me cough every 5 seconds. I'm muting like crazy. So, wow. Okay. So I just didn't know that was what this book was about. And so that's really, really great. So it's rhythm for everybody. So this really isn't geared towards drummers. It just happens to be that you're a drummer, and obviously it applies to us.
Correct. Yeah. Wow. It is the book of rhythm, and rhythm is for any and every instrument.
Yeah. So it's just annotation. I mean, I don't want to say just, but it's
every combination / permutation of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 12 beat groupings. Every single one in order.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It's really like I've had like, the drummer from Fish, John Fishman, he bought the book. James Brandon Lewis, who is this amazing, jazz saxophone player who's been on tour with Mesthetics, the guys from Fugazi. He has the book. Peter Erskine, the famous jazz drummer, he has the book.
Peter.
Peter. Sean Lennon, Jamaldeen Tacuma, they all have the book. Now, whether or not they're all using it, I don't know, but they certainly endorse it at one point or another. Now, I got people all over the world, though, utilizing this book. Literally, it's been sold in over 20 countries now. And and I continue to, I just put 2 of them in the mail today, put one in the mail to Australia and one in the mail to California.
Wow.
I'm not even advertising. And I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying, like, I need to sell more books.
Fantastic.
I'm getting back into starting to promote that as well as my record, because I'm hoping that they both kind of feed into each other,
Yeah. Let's talk about the latest work. Let's talk about the recordings. Let's talk about what you're doing on that side of the space. Are you a multi-instrumentalist? Because that part I don't know about you.
I mean, not really. I mean, I have a bass and guitar and a banjo, and I'm mainly a drummer. I mean, I play any of those instruments, keys, bass, guitar, any of that stuff, enough to where I can write my own music. And enough to show some people some parts, but I wouldn't probably get on stage. It would take me, a good amount of practice to get more proficient on those instruments. So I'm primarily still a drummer, but I play all kinds of percussion instruments and stuff. my newest record, The Beat Fantastic, is primarily unpitched drums and percussion that I kind of utilize to make almost like pop or rock song structures out of, so that they're kind of catchy and hooky. Now, this one's a bit more like a soundtrack, as there are these kind of interesting sort of interludes between some of the bigger pieces. But, in a nutshell, what I do is I take pretty traditional drums and percussion, but I kind of craft them into these catchy kind of drum pop songs in a way.
Yeah. Like what Stewart Copeland did for soundtracks for like talk radio or Wall Street.
Maybe I haven't heard that, but maybe I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But utilizing like unpitched drums as kind of like the leading force to make the melody, rather than having like the vibraphone or some other pitched instrument do it. I get it from how I tune like snares and utilizing different distortion levels, and if the drum is really dead or if I'm going to let it ring, I make kind of melodies utilizing all those sort of timbres and textures.
Oh, that's so cool. So similar, I guess it reminds me of maybe what Terry Bozzio was doing during like the Polytown sessions back in '94, when he started utilizing his ginormous kit, right? He had his pentatonic scale here and gosh, what was the other one? What are the two scales? You got your I
don't know, man. Mixolydian, I don't know. It doesn't matter,
It's the modes. Yeah, but the idea that, he has this drum kit, with two separate tunings, right? So he, in a sense, has every pitch available to him. And I love that idea. Although I do find it becomes tiresome live. Recorded, it's fantastic to just sit down and listen to something and vibe on a rhythmic piece that has melodic tones to it, so I love this idea, Blake. I especially like the idea of the different timbres and the buzz of the snare having different settings available. It creates different feels, different vibes, different tonalities. I love that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, my approach is not traditional or orthodox to how I make these solo records specifically at all. I had a friend of mine who is great, like drum and bass composer and programmer, and was telling another friend when I wasn't there, but that I've got a very unique approach to just how I use percussion and stuff, and because again I'm using the microphone and the gain stage as part of my paintbrush in a way.
Yeah.
Instead of just like I think a lot of people just, I mean, I don't want to say a lot of people. Who knows what people do, right? But that's my approach is to like I want to be a bit more artful about it, and I kind of I'm definitely influenced by like Phil Spector and the way that he would create these amazing sounds by having groups of instruments have the function of one instrument. Like there might be 5 or 6 things playing the bass line. Right. The bass, you've got an upright bass, you've got electric bass with fingers, you have electric bass with pick, you might have the lower end of a piano, you might have a bass clarinet, you might have the lower end of a tack piano, all blended together to make, like, what the fuck is that bass?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like this hybrid bass that he made to make this one sound, right? And I kind of approach my recording like that a lot as well, because I have very limited equipment, just because I've been pretty uncompromising, and then therefore fairly kind of not poor, but very lower middle class most of my life as a musician. And so I'm very economic with what I work with. I mean, I still have a hi-hat stand that I use that I got when I was 12.
That's awesome.
It's a single braced Tama Swing Star stand, by the way. One of the fucking best ever. The ones they made in the 80s are like they're fucking tanks, man. And
yes, they are.
It's a single braced one. Yeah. So it's light, so I only have a few snares, but I tune the shit out of them. I put different heads on them. I use all kinds of different forms of dampening and different sorts of tuning mixed with different proximities of the microphone, mixed with different gain stages. Right. And so all those variables allow me to kind of it gives me a bigger palette as far as, what I can do with just a traditional drum set,
Yeah. That's rad. So where do you live right now?
I'm in
Without getting too
upstate New
personal.
York right now. I'm
Upstate New
about,
York.
I'm sorry?
Upstate New York, you said?
Yeah, I'm 3 hours outside of New York City, in the northwestern Catskills, in a little town called
Wow.
Oneonta. It's a little college town.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you don't have to give me your address or anything. I
Oh,
was I was
I
just
won't.
kinda hoping you were close enough close enough that I could drive over and check out your setup because I would love it. But,
Right on.
no,
Where are you located?
I'm just outside of Seattle. If you remember that TV show Twin Peaks, I live in the town that show is based in.
Oh, that
So
is kick ass.
it is kick-ass.
I
I
love
love
Twin Peaks.
same, and in fact, I moved here because of Twin Peaks. I mean, not because of in the sense, but I mean, I discovered the area because of Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
I'm from near here, but I ended up moving here in 2003 before they built it up. Now it's pretty built up, which is kind of obnoxious. But
Yeah.
in 2015, when Lynch came back and he refilmed, for the reboot, the season 3 reboot that they did for Showtime. I was fortunate enough to actually be on set on my birthday 9 years ago, and got to hang out with Kyle and Harry Goaz and Lynch, and it was freaking amazing
That's awesome.
at the sheriff's station.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
man.
yeah.
That's so great.
Was completely out of control, and I'm in the Showtime promo. I didn't make the show. My footage got cut because I was just an extra, but at least I got to experience it, man. It was freaking badass, and I would have never done it if I hadn't been here. So, God
Yeah,
bless. We're
nice.
all good. Wow. So what's next for you? I mean, obviously you're here today. You're here doing your promo run, but what's the next step for Blake Fleming? Where are you heading with all of this?
I got a few things. I've always got a number of irons in the fire. I have a new project that I'm working on that I'm not going to announce yet because we're just
Okay.
going to put it out there. But it's something that I think will excite a number of people because of the nature of the collaboration. And I have another collaboration that is going to be mixed. That is very like electroacoustic, noisy, soundscapey stuff that I do weird drums and percussion stuff to that. Like I do a lot of stuff with another thing I forgot to mention that I mess with a lot too is very speed, on things I use as a 4-track. I have that basically as a preamp and as a very speed machine. So that I can really, again, mess with tonalities and stuff.
Like time stretching, basically, in a sense. But
I'm not just stretching
stretch.
the time, but actually changing the pitch along relative to that.
Okay.
Right. So like if I record, say if I'm playing if I record with the tape playing really fast, but then play it back at normal speed.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to have a much lower pitch than a normal drum sound played at normal speed. It's going to be below that because it was recorded much faster. So I utilize things like that. I've got a few things. I made a record for a group in Croatia at the beginning of this year that was really, really good. It was more of like a heavier kind of poppy thing, but I don't even know if they have a name. It was just, kind of like the music director guy is the one that hired me. But it was really great and really fun to work on. I did all that, at a friend's studio and then in my home studio. And then, like I said, I already mentioned me and KK Null have mentioned doing some collaborating together. I have this new collaboration that's kind of under wraps at the moment. And I've got another solo record that I want to work on. And, I need to make some videos for my book. I'm starting to do that now, promotional videos and ways to take people through the book and all the different ways that I have kind of come up with myself to utilize the material. So it's a lot because, I work for myself right now and so I need to be busy. I need to have things going on. So I'm pretty self-motivated. So I stay pretty active, but it's also terrifying at times. And then there's times like, the last few days have been great. I've been selling records and books, and I'm like, it feels awesome. But then other times when that doesn't happen, you're like, you freak out a little bit.
Yeah. No, but you're reminding me that anybody can do anything if they put their mind to it. I mean, I know it's an old adage that's been said way too many times, but the reality is listening to you today, Blake, reminds me that if you really are passionate about something, if you're really willing to die for your work, or you're willing to die for an idea, it will kind of automatically, how do I want to say this? Basically automatically motivates you towards working harder. And the thing that you've reminded me today is boy, I don't work hard enough. I kind of let life happen sometimes. I've certainly been doing it lately. And it's a good reminder to, to put my best foot forward, to be grateful for the things I've experienced, and to keep trying to do something, not because I'm trying to make money or trying to be famous, but just doing it because it's in me and it's worth getting out, and I love that I love that you just keep going despite whatever's going on around you, and proof that it's not about the money. It's not about being lower middle class or being upper middle class. It's not about being an influencer. It's just doing what's stuck inside of your head. And it's there because, well, I don't know. It's there because it's there, but it needs to get out,
Yeah. And as far as doing this work, as far as having any sort of success, again, quote unquote, the only thing that I can really tell people, and that I tell students that want to be like professional musicians, you just got to stay on the horse, man. That's the only, the only difference between people that don't succeed and people that do succeed is the people that succeed stayed in it long enough most of the time. Now, some people try their best and just have fucking bad luck. And sometimes I've felt that way, that it didn't matter what I did. It didn't seem like I was going to get up another rung in the ladder as far as making it just a little bit easier for me to exist as a musician,
Yeah.
Perhaps that's still coming. I don't know, but that's also, it feeds me. But I wouldn't have done anything had I not just stayed on the path that I was on. So that's really the only thing I can leave anybody with. It's like some sort of word of wisdom or inspiration, is like, if you want to do it, man, you just got to stay with it, because once you stop and you give up, well, you're not going to do it for sure then.
Yeah.
And I've always kept that pretty close to the front of my brain. And it's definitely a driving force today, and partly because I don't know what else I'm going to do. Like, this is, I don't have a degree, I don't have any other real passions. I mean, I do have passions, but not to this degree. And I truly believe this is what I'm best at. So for better, for worse, fuck it. This is what I'm going to do. And if I got to go get a little side job one of these days, I'm not above that. I've done that in the past, but right now I'm trying my best to not have to do that. And so far, so good.
You've been listening to Sentimental Illness with Rob Leland. Our theme song, Machine, has been graciously provided by Harris Heller. Don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast media. You can directly support the show on Patreon as well, where you can find us at patreon.com/This is Sentimental Illness. It also helps us a lot if you rate the show online, so jump out there and give us 5 stars. And lastly, always remember, your mind will overthink everything, but your heart can never love enough. See you soon.